The Saturday afternoon sun was bright and warm as Tom pulled his car into the parking lot of Riverside Mall. In the back seat, his two daughters were bouncing with excitement. 7-year-old Lily was talking nonstop about the new doll she wanted to see, while her younger sister, 5-year-old Grace, was more interested in the promise of ice cream their dad had made earlier that morning. Tom smiled as he listened to them chatter away. These simple moments meant everything to him now. Just 6 months ago, he wasn't sure if he'd ever be able to do something like this again. The injury he got during his time in the Marines had changed his life in ways he never imagined. The explosion that took part of his left leg had also taken away his confidence for a while. But today was different. Today, he felt ready. He opened the car door and reached for his crutch. Some days were better than others with the prosthetic leg. Today wasn't one of the better days. The physical therapy session from yesterday had left him a bit sore, so he decided the crutch would make things easier. He didn't mind. At least he was here, standing on his own, taking his girls out for a fun day. His wife, Jenny, was working a double shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. She had been his rock through everything. The surgeries, the recovery, the dark days when he didn't want to get out of bed. She never complained, never made him feel like a burden, so when she had to work this weekend, Tom insisted he could handle taking the girls to the mall. He wanted to prove to himself, and maybe to her too, that he was still the same dad he used to be. The girls ran ahead as they walked toward the entrance, their excited voices echoing in the parking lot. Tom called out for them to slow down and wait for him. They stopped and turned around, suddenly remembering to stay close to their dad. Grace ran back and grabbed his free hand, squeezing it tight. As they approached the main entrance, Tom noticed a security guard standing by the door. The man was probably in his 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with his arms crossed over his chest. He was watching people come and go with a stern expression that seemed a bit too serious for a mall on a Saturday afternoon. When Tom and his daughters walked past, he felt the guard's eyes on him. It was that kind of look he had gotten used to over the past few months. The look that lingered a bit too long. The look that made him feel like he needed to explain himself. But Tom had learned to ignore it. People stared sometimes. It wasn't always malicious. Sometimes they were just curious or they didn't know how to react to seeing someone with a visible disability. He held the door open for his daughters and followed them inside. The mall was crowded, which was normal for a weekend. Families were everywhere. Kids running around, teenagers hanging out in groups, couples window shopping. The smell of fresh pretzels and coffee filled the air. Lily immediately pulled on Tom's sleeve, pointing toward the toy store down the corridor. They made their way through the crowd slowly. Tom's leg was starting to ache a bit, but he didn't want to show it. The girls were having too much fun, and he didn't want to cut their day short. They stopped at a fountain where Grace threw in a penny and made a wish. She wouldn't tell anyone what she wished for, giggling when Lily tried to guess. After visiting the toy store, where Lily spent 20 minutes deciding between 2 dolls before choosing the one she had wanted all along, they headed to the bookstore. Tom loved bookstores. Even as a kid, he could spend hours just browsing through the shelves. Now he wanted to share that love with his daughters. Grace was just learning to read, and he wanted to find some new books for her. The bookstore was quiet compared to the rest of the mall. Soft music played in the background, and the smell of coffee from the little cafe in the corner mixed with the scent of new books. It was peaceful. Tom felt himself relax as they walked down the aisles. Lily headed straight for the children's section, and Grace followed her sister like she always did. Tom stood nearby, keeping an eye on them while looking at some books himself. He picked up a mystery novel, reading the back cover. For a moment, everything felt normal. Not the new normal he had been adjusting to, but the old normal. The normal from before the deployment, before the injury, before everything changed. Grace called out to him, holding up a book with a colorful cover. It had a picture of a cat wearing a hat. Tom smiled and walked over to see it better. She was sounding out the words on the cover, her little face scrunched up in concentration. He knelt down beside her, helping her with the harder words, praising her when she got them right. They were so absorbed in the moment that Tom didn't notice someone approaching from behind. It wasn't until he felt a firm hand grip his shoulder that he realized they weren't alone. He stood up quickly, turning around to see who it was. It was the security guard from the entrance. Up close, Tom could see the name tag pinned to his uniform. The man's expression hadn't softened since they entered the mall. If anything, he looked even more suspicious now. Tom's heart sank. He had a bad feeling about what was coming next, and he really hoped he was wrong. His daughters looked up at the guard, their happy expressions fading into confusion and concern. Tom instinctively moved slightly in front of them, a protective gesture he didn't even realize he was making. The guard's voice was loud enough that a few other shoppers nearby turned to look. And just like that, their perfect Saturday afternoon was about to take a turn that none of them expected. The security guard's grip on Tom's shoulder was firm, almost aggressive. Tom turned around completely, trying to keep his voice calm and steady. He could feel his daughters pressing closer to his legs, sensing that something was wrong. "Can I help you with something?" Tom asked, keeping his tone polite. He had learned a long time ago that staying calm was always the best approach, especially when you had no idea what was happening. The guard didn't smile. He didn't soften his expression at all. Instead, he looked Tom up and down with obvious suspicion. "I need to see some identification," he said flatly. Tom blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, what? Why do you need my ID?" "I'm just shopping with my kids." "Sir, I'm going to need you to cooperate," the guard said, louder this time. A few more people in the bookstore were starting to notice now. An older woman browsing nearby glanced over, then quickly looked away. A young couple near the magazine stopped talking and watched. Tom felt his face getting warm. This was embarrassing. He could handle being stared at, but not like this, not in front of his daughters. "Look, I don't understand what the problem is. We've been here for maybe 20 minutes. We haven't done anything wrong." The guard crossed his arms. His name tag said Derek, Tom noticed. "We've had reports from multiple stores about suspicious behavior. You've been loitering, making people uncomfortable." Tom felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Suspicious behavior? Loitering? He had been shopping with his two little girls. They had looked at toys, thrown pennies in a fountain, and were now picking out books. What part of that was suspicious? "That's not true," Tom said, his voice still calm but with an edge now. "I've been with my daughters the entire time. We're just shopping." Lily tugged on his hand. "Daddy, what's wrong?" "Why is he being mean?" Grace started to cry softly. The sound of his youngest daughter crying made Tom's chest tighten. This was supposed to be a fun day. He was supposed to be giving them happy memories, not scaring them. "It's okay, sweetie," Tom said, kneeling down to Grace's level, which wasn't easy with his leg. He wiped her tears with his thumb. "Everything's fine." But Derek wasn't backing down. "Sir, I need you to come with me right now or I'm going to have to call the police." Tom stood back up, his jaw clenched. "Call them, please do. Because I haven't done anything wrong and I'm not going anywhere until someone tells me exactly what I'm being accused of." By now, a small crowd had gathered. People were pretending to browse books, but they were clearly watching. Some had their phones out. Tom could see at least 2 people recording. Great, that's all he needed. A video of him being harassed going viral on the internet. Derek reached for his radio, but before he could speak into it, someone else spoke up. "Excuse me?" It was the older woman who had been browsing earlier. She stepped closer, her voice firm and clear. "What exactly has this man done wrong?" Derek turned to her, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "Ma'am, this is a security matter. I need you to step back." "I will not step back," the woman said, louder now. She was probably in her 70s with gray hair and glasses, but there was steel in her voice. "I've been in this store for the past 30 minutes and I've seen this man doing nothing but shopping with his children. So I'll ask you again. What has he done wrong?" Derek stammered. "As I said, we've had multiple complaints about suspicious behavior." "From who?" The woman pressed. "I haven't seen any suspicious behavior." A younger woman with a baby stroller spoke up from near the entrance. "I've been here too. He's just been with his kids. I saw them at the toy store earlier. They were just looking at dolls." Tom felt something loosen in his chest. Complete strangers were defending him. People he'd never met were standing up for him when they had no reason to. Derek's face was getting red now. He clearly hadn't expected this. "Look, I'm just doing my job. I have to respond to complaints." "What complaints?" Another voice called out. It was a teenage boy wearing a bookstore employee vest. He looked nervous but determined. "I work here and nobody from our store called security. We haven't had any problems at all." More people were gathering now. The crowd was growing. Tom could hear whispers, people talking to each other, trying to figure out what was going on. Some were shaking their heads in disapproval, clearly not at Tom, but at the security guard. "This is ridiculous," someone muttered. Let the man shop with his kids, another person said. Derek looked around, seeming to realize he was losing control of the situation. He raised his voice. Everyone needs to step back and mind their own business. This doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us when we see someone being harassed for no reason, the older woman shot back. Then someone in the crowd noticed Tom's hat. He was wearing a faded baseball cap with the Marine Corps emblem on it. He'd almost forgotten he had it on. Wait, a man's voice called out. Is that a veteran's cap? Tom felt all eyes on him now. He nodded slightly, suddenly feeling very self-conscious. He's a veteran, the man said louder, addressing the crowd and Derek. This man served our country, and you're treating him like a criminal. The atmosphere in the bookstore shifted immediately. The whispers got louder. People's expressions changed from curious to angry. Not angry at Tom, but angry at what was happening to him. Derek seemed to realize he'd made a mistake. His confident demeanor cracked a little. I didn't know he was a veteran, but that doesn't change the fact that I received complaints. From who? Multiple people asked at once. Derek didn't have an answer. He looked around at all the faces staring at him, at the phones recording, at the two little girls still clinging to their father. For the first time since this started, he looked uncertain. Tom took a deep breath. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the flood of emotions. Anger, humiliation, frustration, but also something else. Gratitude. These strangers had his back. They didn't know him, didn't know his story, but they stood up for him anyway. Lily squeezed his hand. Daddy, can we go home now? Tom was about to answer when another voice cut through the crowd. This one was different, commanding, authoritative. What in the world is going on here? Everyone turned to see an older man pushing through the crowd. He was probably in his 60s with gray hair and a weathered face. He walked with a cane, but there was strength in his posture. And on his head he wore a cap too, a Vietnam veteran's cap. The man's eyes scanned the scene, taking in Tom, the crying children, the security guard, and the crowd. His jaw set in a hard line. Someone better start explaining right now, he said. The older veteran walked right up to Derek, his cane tapping firmly against the bookstore floor with each step. Despite his age and the cane, there was nothing frail about him. His presence commanded respect, and the crowd seemed to sense it. People stepped aside to let him through. I asked a question, the man said, looking directly at Derek. What's going on here? Derek straightened up, trying to regain his authority. Sir, this is a security matter. I'm going to have to ask you to step back. The older man didn't move an inch. A security matter? This man and his children are a security matter? He gestured toward Tom and the girls. You've got to be kidding me. We received multiple complaints about suspicious behavior, Derek repeated, but his voice wasn't as confident as before. I'm just doing my job. Multiple complaints, the veteran repeated slowly. He turned to the crowd. Did anyone here make a complaint about this man? Silence. People shook their heads. Some said no out loud. The veteran turned back to Derek. Interesting. So where are these multiple complaints coming from? Derek's face was getting redder. That information is confidential. I don't have to disclose that to you. Confidential, the older man said with a bitter laugh. That's convenient. He looked at Tom for the first time, his eyes going from Tom's face down to his prosthetic leg, then back up to the Marine Corps cap. What's your name, son? Tom, he answered, his voice rough with emotion. Tom Peterson. I'm Frank, the older man said, extending his hand. Tom shook it, feeling the firm grip. Vietnam, 1968 to 1970. You? Marines, Afghanistan, 2 tours. Frank nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without more words needed. He turned back to Derek. So let me get this straight. This Marine, who lost part of his leg serving his country, came to your mall to shop with his 2 little girls, and you decided to harass him. Do I have that right? I'm not harassing anyone, Derek protested. I'm investigating a complaint. A complaint that doesn't exist, Frank shot back. I've been watching you since I walked in. You targeted this man the moment you saw him. Want to know how I know? Because I saw you staring at him when he walked in. I was having coffee at that cafe near the entrance, and I watched you. You didn't like the look of him from the start? The crowd murmured in agreement. Several people nodded. Derek's jaw clenched. That's not true. I treat everyone equally. Do you? Frank challenged. Then why him? Why a dad shopping with his kids? What about him looked suspicious to you? Was it the crutch? The prosthetic leg, what? Tom felt tears stinging his eyes, but he blinked them back. He didn't want to cry, especially not in front of his daughters. But hearing someone, a complete stranger, defend him so fiercely was overwhelming. For months he'd felt invisible, or worse, like people saw him as damaged. But Frank saw him. Really saw him. Grace was still sniffling against his leg. Lily had wrapped both arms around his waist and wouldn't let go. They were scared, and that made Tom angrier than anything else. His girls shouldn't have to see this. They shouldn't have to feel afraid in a bookstore. I want to speak to your manager, Frank said firmly. Right now. Not a supervisor. The actual mall manager. Derek hesitated. That's not necessary. I can handle this. You've already proven you can't handle this, Frank said. Either you call your manager or I will. Your choice. The bookstore employee who had spoken up earlier stepped forward. I can call mall management, he offered. I have the number. Please do, Frank said. The young employee pulled out his phone and walked a few steps away to make the call. The crowd had grown even larger now. People from other stores had noticed the commotion and come to see what was happening. The bookstore was packed with onlookers. Derek looked around nervously. Everyone needs to disperse. You're blocking the store. We're not going anywhere, the elderly woman who had first spoken up declared. Not until this gets sorted out properly. Others voiced their agreement. People pulled out their phones, some recording, others typing furiously. Tom realized this was probably already on social media somewhere. He didn't know how he felt about that. Frank stood beside Tom, not touching him, but close enough that Tom could feel the support. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. This stranger was standing with him, literally and figuratively. Daddy, Lily whispered, tugging on his shirt. Is that man going to help us? Tom looked down at his daughter's worried face. Yeah, sweetie. I think he is. A few minutes later, a woman in a business suit came rushing into the bookstore. She looked harried and concerned, her eyes scanning the crowd before landing on Derek. What is going on here? She asked, her voice tight. Ms. Walker, Derek started, but Frank interrupted him. Are you the mall manager? Frank asked. The woman nodded. I'm Patricia Walker, yes. I manage this mall. Someone called and said there was an incident involving security. Can someone please explain? Multiple people started talking at once. Patricia held up her hand. One at a time, please. Frank stepped forward. I'll explain. Your security guard here has been harassing this veteran and his two young daughters. He's accused them of suspicious behavior with no evidence, demanded identification, threatened to call the police, and has frightened these children badly. All while this man was doing nothing more than shopping for books with his girls. Patricia's expression grew serious. She looked at Derek. Is this true? I was responding to complaints, Derek said defensively. What complaints? Patricia asked. Who complained? Derek opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't have an answer. That's what I thought, Patricia said quietly. She turned to Tom. Sir, I am so deeply sorry. This is completely unacceptable. I can't apologize enough for what you and your daughters have been put through. Tom didn't know what to say. He just nodded. Patricia looked at the crowd, at all the phones recording, at the dozens of witnesses. Her jaw set in a hard line. Derek, you're done for today. Go to my office and wait for me there. We will be having a very serious conversation about your future with this company. Derek started to protest, but Patricia's look silenced him. He turned and walked out of the bookstore, his shoulders hunched. The crowd parted to let him through, and Tom heard a few people make comments as he passed. Patricia turned back to Tom. Please, can you and your daughters come with me to my office? I'd like to speak with you privately and see how we can make this right. Tom looked down at Lily and Grace. They looked exhausted, their faces tear-stained. He wanted nothing more than to take them home, but he also felt like he owed it to them to see this through, to show them that standing up for yourself mattered, that people who did wrong things should be held accountable. Okay, he said quietly. As Patricia led them toward the exit, Frank walked beside them. I'm coming too, he said. If that's all right with you, Tom. Tom looked at the older veteran, at the man who had stood up for him when he felt powerless. I'd appreciate that, he said, his voice thick with emotion. The crowd began to applaud as they left the bookstore. It started with one person, then spread through the entire group. People clapped, some whistled, others called out words of support and encouragement. Tom felt Lily squeeze his hand. When he looked down at her, she was smiling for the first time since this whole thing started. Patricia's office was on the second floor of the mall, away from the noise and crowds. It was a small space with a desk, a few chairs, and windows overlooking the main shopping area below. Tom could see people still milling around near the bookstore, probably talking about what had just happened. Patricia gestured to the chairs. "Please sit down. Can I get you anything? Water? Juice for the girls?" Lily and Grace both nodded shyly when Tom looked at them. Patricia smiled warmly at them and walked to a small refrigerator in the corner. She came back with 2 juice boxes and handed them to the girls. They took them quietly, still clearly shaken by everything. Frank sat down in one of the chairs, his cane resting against the armrest. Tom lowered himself into the seat next to him, grateful to finally be off his leg. The prosthetic had been bothering him for the last hour, but he hadn't wanted to show it. Patricia sat behind her desk and took a deep breath. "First, I want to apologize again. What happened down there should never have happened. This mall is supposed to be a safe, welcoming place for families, and you and your daughters were treated in a way that goes against everything we stand for." Tom nodded but didn't say anything. He was emotionally exhausted. All he had wanted was a nice day out with his girls. Instead, they'd been humiliated and scared. "Can you tell me exactly what happened from the beginning?" Patricia asked gently. "Take your time." Tom told her everything. How they'd come to the mall, visited the toy store, stopped at the fountain, and ended up in the bookstore. How Derek had grabbed his shoulder and accused him of suspicious behavior. How he demanded ID and threatened to call the police. Tom's voice cracked a few times as he spoke, especially when he talked about how scared his daughters had been. Lily stayed close to her dad the whole time, one hand holding his arm. Grace had climbed into his lap and was sipping her juice quietly. She kept glancing at Frank, who gave her reassuring smiles. Patricia listened without interrupting. Her expression grew more troubled with each detail. When Tom finished, she sat back in her chair and rubbed her temples. "I am so sorry. This is completely unacceptable. Derek has only been with us for 3 weeks. We hired him through a security company, and clearly, they didn't vet him properly." "It wasn't just about bad training," Frank said, speaking up for the first time since they'd entered the office. "That young man targeted Tom from the moment he saw him. I watched it happen. He saw the prosthetic leg and made assumptions. That's discrimination, plain and simple." Patricia nodded slowly. "You're right, and I won't defend it or make excuses for it. Derek is being terminated. I'm calling the security company right after this meeting to end their contract with us as well. We'll find a different company, one that properly trains their employees about respect and basic human decency." Tom felt a small sense of relief at that. At least Derek wouldn't be harassing anyone else. "But I want to do more than just apologize," Patricia continued. She opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out several gift cards. "I know this doesn't fix what happened, but I'd like to cover your entire shopping trip today. These are gift cards to our major stores. Please, take your daughters anywhere they want to go. Get them whatever they want. It's the least I can do." She slid the gift cards across the desk. Tom looked at them but didn't pick them up immediately. Part of him wanted to just leave, to go home and forget this whole day. But another part of him knew his daughters deserved to have the fun day he'd promised them. "That's very generous," Tom said quietly. "Thank you." Patricia smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I also want you to know that we're implementing new training for all our security staff. Not just about people with disabilities, but about treating everyone with dignity and respect. What happened today can never happen again." "Good," Frank said firmly, "because if I see anything like this happening again, there will be consequences. I know a lot of veterans in this area. We look out for each other, and we don't forget when businesses treat our people badly." Patricia nodded. "I understand, and I hope you'll give us a chance to prove we're better than what you saw today." There was a knock on the door. A young woman poked her head in. "Ms. Walker, there are several people downstairs asking about what happened. Some of them want to speak to you." Patricia sighed. "Tell them I'll be down in a few minutes." The woman nodded and closed the door. "This is going to be all over social media, isn't it?" Tom said. It wasn't really a question. "Probably," Patricia admitted. "I saw at least a dozen people recording. But honestly, that might not be a bad thing. People should know what happened. And they should know how we're handling it." Frank nodded in agreement. The truth isn't something to hide from. Tom didn't do anything wrong. He has nothing to be ashamed of. Tom looked down at Grace, who had fallen asleep in his lap, worn out from all the stress and emotions. Lily was leaning against his arm, finishing her juice. They looked so small and vulnerable. He thought about how scared they'd been, how Grace had cried, how Lily had asked if they could go home. But he also thought about the people who had stood up for them. The elderly woman who had first challenged Derek, the young mother with the stroller, the bookstore employee, and Frank, who had walked into a situation that had nothing to do with him and had still chosen to help. You know what surprised me the most? Tom said suddenly. All those people who spoke up, they didn't know me. They didn't owe me anything. But they stood up for us anyway, Frank smiled. That's because there are more good people in this world than bad ones. Sometimes we forget that, especially when we're the ones being treated badly. But they're out there. You just saw proof of it. Patricia stood up. I should let you go. I'm sure you all want to get on with your day or maybe just head home. Whatever you decide to do, thank you for giving me the chance to make this right, or at least start to make it right. Tom carefully shifted Grace in his arms and stood up, taking the gift cards from the desk. Frank got to his feet as well, steadying himself with his cane. As they walked toward the door, Patricia called out, Tom, if you're willing, I'd like to stay in touch. I meant what I said about the training. I'd appreciate your input on making sure this never happens to anyone else. Tom turned back and nodded. I'd be okay with that. They left the office and headed back down to the main floor of the mall. As they walked, Tom noticed people watching them, but it felt different now. Not suspicious or judgmental, more like curious, maybe even respectful. When they reached the main corridor, Tom was surprised to see a small group of people waiting. The elderly woman from the bookstore was there. So was the young mother with the stroller, the bookstore employee, and about a dozen others who had been part of the crowd. The elderly woman stepped forward. We just wanted to make sure you were okay, she said, and to tell you that what happened was wrong. Completely wrong. Tom felt his throat tighten with emotion. Thank you. All of you. You didn't have to do what you did back there. Yes, we did, the woman said firmly. Standing up for what's right isn't optional. It's what decent people do. Others nodded and murmured agreement. A few people came forward to shake Tom's hand. One man thanked him for his service. Another woman knelt down to talk to Lily, telling her how brave she'd been. Frank stood beside Tom through it all, a quiet presence of support. When the small crowd finally dispersed, he turned to Tom. What are you going to do now? Tom looked at his daughters, then at the gift cards in his hand. I think we're going to get that ice cream I promised them this morning. The ice cream shop was on the first floor near the food court. Tom, Frank, and the girls made their way there slowly. Grace had woken up and was walking again, holding Tom's hand tightly. Lily had perked up at the mention of ice cream, which made Tom smile. Kids were resilient like that. The shop had a dozen different flavors displayed behind glass. Lily pressed her face close to the glass, trying to decide between chocolate chip cookie dough and strawberry. Grace wanted vanilla with rainbow sprinkles, simple and classic just like her. What flavor do you want, Mr. Frank? Grace asked, looking up at the older veteran. Frank chuckled. You know what? I think I'll get chocolate. Can't go wrong with chocolate. Tom ordered for everyone, and they found a table near the window. The girls attacked their ice cream with the enthusiasm only children could have. For a few minutes, it felt almost normal, like the incident in the bookstore had happened to someone else. How are you really doing? Frank asked quietly while the girls were distracted with their dessert. Tom was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Honestly, I don't know. Part of me is angry, really angry, but another part of me just feels tired. I'm tired of being looked at like I'm broken or dangerous or both. Frank nodded slowly. I know that feeling. After I came back from Vietnam, people didn't know how to act around me. Some treated me like a hero. Others treated me like I might snap at any moment. Both felt wrong. How did you deal with it? Tom asked. Time, mostly, Frank said, and finding people who understood. Other veterans. People who'd been through similar things. It helps to know you're not alone. He paused, taking a bite of his ice cream. What happened today wasn't about you, you know? That security guard, Derek, he's got his own problems, his own prejudices. That's on him, not you. I know that up here, Tom said, tapping his temple. But knowing it and feeling it are two different things. That's the truth, Frank agreed. Lily looked up from her ice cream. Daddy, why was that security man so mean to us? Tom exchanged a glance with Frank, then looked at his daughter. How do you explain discrimination to a 7-year-old? How do you tell her that some people make judgments based on how others look? Sometimes, Tom said carefully, people make mistakes. They see someone who looks different from them and they make wrong guesses about that person. That man saw Daddy's leg and made a wrong guess about what kind of person I am. But that's silly, Lily said. You're a good person. Tom felt his eyes getting wet. Thank you, sweetie. But not everyone takes the time to figure that out. That's why what those other people did today was so important. They didn't know me either, but they gave me a chance. They stood up when something wasn't right. Grace wiped ice cream from her mouth. I like the nice lady, the one with the gray hair. Me too, Tom said. And I liked Mr. Frank here, who came to help us even though we were strangers. Frank waved his hand dismissively. That's what we do. We look out for each other. Besides, I've been where you are. Maybe not exactly, but close enough. When I was younger, I needed people to stand up for me too. It's just paying it forward. They finished their ice cream in comfortable silence. Tom noticed people glancing at their table occasionally, but it didn't feel threatening. Some people smiled. A few gave small nods of respect. One elderly man in a navy cap gave Frank a salute as he walked by, which Frank returned. Tom's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his wife, Jenny. She'd seen something on social media. Someone had posted a video of the incident and it was already being shared hundreds of times. She was asking if they were okay. Tom called her. She picked up immediately. Tom, are you okay? Are the girls okay? I just saw a video and I couldn't believe it. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. We're fine, Tom assured her. We're actually eating ice cream right now. The girls are okay. A little shaken up, but okay. What happened? The video didn't show everything. Tom gave her a quick summary, keeping his voice low so the girls wouldn't have to relive it all again. He told her about Derek, about the crowd, about Frank, and about Patricia. When he finished, Jenny was quiet for a moment. I should have been there, she said finally. You couldn't have known this would happen. And honestly, some good came out of it. The girls saw a lot of people standing up for what was right. That's an important lesson. I'm still leaving work early, Jenny said. I'll be home in an hour. I love you. Love you too. After he hung up, Frank stood up. I should probably get going. Let you folks enjoy the rest of your day. Wait, Tom said, standing up too. He extended his hand. Thank you. Really. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in. Frank shook his hand firmly. You would have been fine. You were handling it. I just sped things along. He smiled. But you're welcome. Take care of yourself, Tom, and take care of those beautiful girls. He turned to leave, but Lily jumped up. Mr. Frank, wait. She ran over and hugged him. Frank looked surprised, but patted her head gently. You're a brave girl, he told her. Don't ever forget that. Grace joined her sister, and Frank hugged them both. Then, with a final wave, he walked away, his cane tapping against the floor. Tom and his daughters watched him go. Then they gathered their things and headed toward the exit. On the way, they passed the bookstore. Tom noticed that Patricia was there talking to a group of employees. She saw him and gave a small wave. He waved back. As they walked to the parking lot, Tom thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the anger, the humiliation, but also the kindness. The strangers who had become allies, the people who had refused to stay silent. Frank, who had stood beside him without being asked. Daddy, Lily said as they reached the car. Yeah, sweetie. Today was scary, but it was also kind of amazing. All those people helped us. Tom opened the car door and helped his daughters get buckled in. You're right, it was both. Sometimes life is like that, hard and beautiful at the same time. That night, after the girls were in bed, Tom sat with Jenny on the couch and told her everything in more detail. She held his hand the whole time, occasionally wiping tears from her eyes. The video has over 50,000 views now, she said, showing him her phone. People are sharing it everywhere. They're saying really nice things about you. And about that man, Frank. Tom looked at the comments. Most were supportive, praising the crowd for intervening, condemning Derek's behavior, and thanking Tom for his service. It was overwhelming. You know what the girls asked me at bedtime? Tom said. What? They asked if we could go back to the mall next weekend. Lily said she wants to see if the nice lady is there so she can say thank you. Jenny smiled through her tears. They're incredible. Just like their dad. Tom pulled her close. I was so scared today. Not for me, but for them. I didn't want them to see their dad being treated like that. But they also saw their dad handle it with dignity, Jenny said. They saw people stand up for what's right. They learned that even when bad things happen, there are good people who will help. That's not a bad lesson. Tom thought about that. Maybe she was right. Maybe this day, as difficult as it had been, had taught his daughter something important about courage and community and standing up for others. His phone buzzed again. It was a friend request on social media. From Frank. The message attached said simply, "Stay strong, brother. You're not alone." Tom smiled and accepted the request. He typed back, "Thank you for everything. Same to you." As he put his phone down, Tom realized something. Today had changed him. Not the harassment part, but everything that came after. He'd seen the best of humanity when he'd expected the worst. And that was worth remembering. You okay? Jenny asked. Tom nodded. Yeah, I think I am.